We have a lot of crazy people that we have to encounter. Everybody thinks we are surveying the road. So anybody who sees us out there coming out and say, "What are you doing?" Second thing is they say, "Get off my property." I've had guns get pulled out on me, knives.
Welcome to another episode of the Will Frederick Podcast, where we talk about real estate, wealth building, money, and life. Today, we have a good friend of mine and a trusted, valuable resource as a co-business person in our community, Ross Kinchen of the Kinchin Group. Ross, what is your company? Tell me about your company.
So the Kinchin Group, it's pretty much, I like to explain, as a one-stop shop. So we specialize in land surveying, real estate consulting, kind of help people get to where they need to go with their investments. So kind of do everything.
Yeah, Ross and I met each other, I think it was back in 2018. My business partner and my business partner actually knew his grandfather, and he kind of said, "Hey, you need to get to know my grandson. Y'all need to go meet." And so we met with Ross one day, and I remember this. John and I left that meeting, and we were like, this is going to be a really good thing. And sure enough, it has. I mean, it's exceeded our expectations. And leaving that meeting, our expectations were pretty high.
Yeah, that was probably, 2018 or so? Yeah, I think it was probably about a year or two into my career, getting started doing what I do now. And I remember that meeting, and y'all had some very ambitious ideas, and I think that we've been a good team working together, and we value each other's expertise, and so it's great.
Yeah, and over the years, Ross and I developed a friendship, and just watched him and his family grow, and really excited. He's participated in a lot of real estate masterminds, and he brings a lot to the table that I know a lot about real estate and certain aspects of it. Ross really rounds out. He's got a lot of wisdom beyond his years in just values and strategy. So I've really learned a lot from Ross, and I've considered him a big resource that I rely on heavily. And I recommend him to a lot of our clients too for surveys.
Yes.
So,
yeah, we appreciate that. And I'm excited to be on today. I like to watch your podcast, and I know that hopefully we'll be able to have some good conversations and learn a little bit, teach a little bit, and just have some fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's always fun. And I love having friends on. So Ross, tell me, when did you decide that surveying was like the thing for you? Because, I don't know. Yeah.
So not a lot of people actually know what land surveying is or what a land surveyor does. And so, growing up, you don't just say like, "Oh, I want to be a land surveyor."
Yeah, I've never seen that on somebody's wish list or anything like that.
No.
Yeah.
So my grandfather, Leonard Jerry Kinchin, he was big into development. So I was exposed to a lot of real estate transactions growing up, and so I found interest in that. I knew that was kind of the direction I wanted to go, as a career. But there's so many different opportunities with real estate, as you know. Mm-hmm. I'd have to say when I really knew surveying was what I wanted to do was my senior year. We had to, they sat us all down and said, you have to pick a career and you have to do a senior project on it. And they really forced us to go in depth on, what it is we wanted to do, how you were able to get to that point. And so that's when I really learned, Mr. Larry Lassard was a good friend of my grandfather's, and so I did an internship with him my senior year and really got the nitty-gritty on what it is that a surveyor does, and that's really when I decided that's what I want to do. We had to run a lot of numbers in that project, and I realized there's not a lot of surveyors out there. So job security definitely is there. Just seeing how in demand surveyors are. Really got me going that direction.
Yeah, and I can tell you, I learned early on in my real estate career, when I started, I was doing a lot of repo property. For Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, I was listing and selling property. And it was very, very common because a lot of the repos, they got repoed because there was some sort of issue or challenge or title or, encroachment. And so we had to get surveys a lot. And I remember having to get surveys, and they were like, "Oh, yeah, it's 6-8 weeks out," And Ross, you've largely solved that problem because you're a lot faster than that.
So yeah, there are times where we do get that far out, and I'll say, it's across the board. It's not just one surveyor or one firm that has a long waiting period. So right now, I would say we're probably about 3 weeks out, which is fairly fast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really fast.
However, the problem is in the real estate industry, as you know, when you need things done, you need it done quick, and you may lose a deal if
you can't get it done in time, and
if you can't get it done in time. And so, right now we're about 3 weeks out, and, I have to applaud my team. They do a great job. We have about 5 guys in our survey department. They work hard. They work outside a lot in this heat right now, in this Louisiana heat. It's miserable, to say the least.
Yeah.
We have a great draftsman, Kyle, in our office. He takes care of getting our maps out. So, you have to put pieces together to be able to decrease that time that it takes to get to the job and get the job out the door, because ultimately, I don't want to be the reason why you lose $1 million deal.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, and I'll tell you this, Ross did a good job of applauding his team, because I know, because I run businesses, like, you need a good team around you. And I'll also fill his bucket a little bit, because it's a rare man that can work with his family, and his mom works for him and his brother works with him, and they're great. I mean, I love walking in that door. It's always a fun, good, like, uplifting, positive experience.
So we do have a family business.
Kinchin Group.
The Kinchin Group, hence the name. So, the first person you talk to when you call the office is my mom, and
which is by design, because his mom's just a wonderful person.
Usually I don't divulge to that, because it's not embarrassing, but it's like, yeah, call my mom at the office and she'll take care of you. But she really has the absolute best customer service. Yeah, so, I love that. That's the first person that you talk to when you call. And then, as you go along through the process, you'll start talking to the guys in the back. You'll talk with Kyle, if we have a question about the map. But ultimately, our job is to get you to the finish line, no matter what job you're doing. So, we work with buyers, we work with sellers, investors. So it's not a one size fits all. And that's what is so unique about our firm. We take the time and really look at each individual project as its own, and try to help guide people in the right direction. And sometimes, you may get the runaround from a title company or other parts of the real estate transaction, but we like to see things through, and we sometimes take jobs that nobody else will take.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Ross has definitely helped untangle some pretty complicated knots for me personally, and I've watched him help other clients of mine do that. And I can tell you, like, and I want to get into a little bit what a survey is, because some people may not understand what a survey is and what a surveyor does. However, it's a real valuable part of the real estate transaction. And so Ross and his company, they administrate some seller finance lots. I will sell a lot, so that's part of what they do. They kind of act as like the management company for that, and that's a very valuable thing for me. I use them for that, but their main thing is surveying, and so I want to more focus on that today.
Correct, yeah.
So tell us what a survey is and what a surveyor does exactly.
So that's a very broad answer, because we do so much. There's so many different types of surveys, but pretty much to generalize it a little bit, we help people, or we show people where their boundary lines are. So if you don't know where your property falls, we go out, we show you where that is. And also we draw maps. So we can give you a physical representation of what you have out on the ground. Mm-hmm. And so that's a big part of what we do is show people what they have. And I'm sure we'll get into this later on, but the biggest thing that I see will be neighbors calling saying, hey, someone is on my property. I need you to verify that. Or, hey, someone built a fence on my property. Well, the only way to figure that out is to call a licensed surveyor to go out and flag your corners and verify whose property is this fence on. Mm-hmm. And so I guess to sum it up, a survey will show you where your boundary lines are.
Yeah, which is so important just almost from a strategic approach to anything, like knowing where the lines are, knowing where the boundaries are, just in a philosophical sense almost. But this is actually a physical, like where the property line is. And you've been in situations where people think they have 30 acres and they actually have 25, and or vice versa, they have more acreage, so one of my favorite sayings is clarity is power. It's because when you have clarity, when you have definition around exactly what we're dealing with, then you have the power to go forth and make a good deal or avoid a bad deal, and just understand what we're talking about. We're all on the same page, and that page ends up being a survey map a lot of times.
Yes, yeah. That's right. And that's a really good statement, because a lot of times, and this is a classic example, I'll go ahead and say this, you'll have a real estate transaction. You'll find a buyer, it'll be under contract. It'll go to the title company. Well, a week before the closing date, the title company sees something's not right. Something's not clear with this property. I can't guarantee the title or give title insurance until I see a new survey stamped showing exactly what's going on. I need some clarity. And so that's whenever they will call our office and say, hey, we're closing in a week.
We need this tomorrow.
I need a new survey tomorrow. And, part of what I do is educate the public because, like we talked about earlier, I'm 3 weeks out. Some people are 4, 5, 6 weeks out. So to be able to get a survey done in a week, it's nearly impossible. And not only scheduling wise, but also just, coordinating. It's a lot that goes into a survey. It's not just like, oh yeah, let me just draw this up for you. You have to physically go out, verify things. And then whenever we produce that map and give it to the title company, they say, okay, now I see what's going on. I'm clear. We're good to close. However,
it also needs to be approved by the governing authority, right? Parish,
correct.
city, whatever.
There are certain surveys that have to get approved depending on what you're trying to do. And then, that could be a 2 to 3 week delay after the survey's done. So, I always say, get a survey done if you're planning to do anything on your property. If you're thinking you're going to sell the property, get it done now. It's going to save you time and money in the long term. If you're buying the property, as soon as you get it under contract, go ahead and request that survey, get on the books. Ultimately, you're going to need a survey anyway. You're going to want to know where your property lines fall. So don't wait until you're sitting at the closing table and they tell you we have to delay it a week, 2, 3 weeks because your financing may fall through. And there's a lot of things that can happen if you don't get it done, in the time you need.
And I'll double down on that because right now, and Ross knows this situation what to talk about, there is a piece of property where my construction office is on Range Roads. Many of you pass it. And so I'm trying to do something real estate wise where I put a lien on it and refinance a lien off of it. Anyway, it's complicated, but I need a survey to do that. And I went to Ross and I was like, oh, I need a survey. I need it quick, He's like, okay, well, wait a minute. There's a whole lot of complicated things here. And so now I'm having to go to the parish and talk to them. And so at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to really hold up what I want to do. But it could potentially have done that, and it could have been really very, very costly for me ultimately.
Well, and for the record, I was going to get to that quick, but whenever I looked at it, I realized everything that was going on. And so I was going to get to that one quick.
Well, again,
1 week.
Yeah. Wow. You better not tell people that, that might be like, oh, you could do it for Will 1 week.
Kidding.
No. Well, and this is where your advice came in handy because you probably could have done a survey, but you were like, whoa, you might need to clarify a few little things. And so I had to go back to the title company that did it. And then I have to talk to the parish, and I've been back and forth with the parish for several weeks. So it's your guidance. You saved me money because you weren't like, yeah, I'll do it and I'll send you a bill. You were like, wait, before I do this, you need to understand from this party what this is.
So that's a really good point because we have calls, I'm not exaggerating. We get 5 to 10 calls every day or two on people who are needing surveys done.
Wow. Yeah.
2 to 3 of those calls, they actually cannot do what they want to do because of either parish regulations or just they can't make it work the way that they want to make it work. And they don't know that until they call me and I take the time and I look at it. In the same case with you, when you called, this is what you were trying to do. I looked at it and I was able to inform you, look,
I don't know if you can do this.
This is what's going on. And then you were able to take the steps to try to move forward. And if you don't have that knowledge, then you can't get to your goal. And so that's one thing that, I have to applaud my team again. We go down into the dirt and we look and we
literally
see,
down into the dirt,
but we see what's going on. What are you trying to accomplish? Let's get to the end goal together because, it's not, you can't do it by yourself.
Yeah. And I will say this too, because hearing you talk about the process reminds me of how many times that I've brought you something that I want to do, and I'm looking through tunnel vision. I'm like, this is what I want to do, and then you ask me some, well, why do you want to do that? And you say, well, you can't do that, what you thought, but here's a way that you can accomplish. And I mean, like probably 75% of the time, it was way better than my idea because Ross has such an amount of experience and knowledge, and like he can see he's gifted. He can see the big picture and say, now here's a way we can skin that cat.
Yeah, so I kind of consider myself a real estate consultant.
Yeah.
Although I am a licensed land surveyor, I have so much experience dealing with different types of investments and development projects. My goal is to look at a piece of property and like you bring me property all the time, and I can give you an idea, how can we best maximize the potential for the property?
Yeah.
A lot of times you'll have someone who may want to sell a piece of property or buy a piece of property, and they have this idea and they do it. Well, then somebody else buys it and they come to me, and we could triple the profit that is available on that property because they just didn't know other options. So as a consultant, I like to give you all the information so you can make an informed decision on how you want to proceed, because there are always so many different options to go when it comes to real estate, know that.
Well, and that's another thing, because I've, as a real estate consultant for my clients, they'll come to me and they want to sell this piece of property. Well, I want to understand what their goal is, because believe it or not, sometimes it's not to maximize value. They've inherited it. They don't really, they just want it to go away. It's a problem. And I'm like, well, hey, look, you could subdivide it, you do this. But they're like, no, I don't want to do that. And I'll just tell them, I said, you can make more money if you do it, or you can press the easy button and do this way. And they're like, yeah, let's do that. And so Ross has been able to add value in helping me understand what is possible, what's not possible. And then also, with those clients, I can press the easy button by saying, oh, I got an investor who will buy this, or maybe it's me, I'll buy this. And then I'll go to Ross and say, how can we do this?
Yeah. And also there are a lot of surprises that come up, and I'm thinking of one right now, and how you said,
share any examples.
You come to me to look at things. And by the way, Will does have some really crazy ideas with certain properties. And so I'll look at it and I'll have to bring him back down to earth.
Yeah.
But so there's
one. John was more the one that you had to do that with.
Yeah, I wasn't going to call anybody out. I wasn't going to call anybody out.
But it's both of us, really.
But
I know it is. When
y'all get together, the ideas start flowing, and really, you're already on Earth, maybe in the sky. John's in outer space. So
you heard that, John, right?
So I really have to get both of y'all back down to at least tree level, and then we can work. But there's a case right now where there's actually an issue where a piece of property was purchased and there was an old survey done on it. However, when they got it resurveyed after they bought it, it found out that there was 100 and some odd feet of overlap that didn't exist. And so now they're not able to do the project, and it's a pretty substantial situation. And so, that's why it's always good. Get it surveyed before you buy it.
On the front end, yeah.
On the front end. Even if it looks like everything is good, it may not. I have people all the time, there's a situation too where somebody bought a house and, they go to do something with their water well or their septic system, and the neighbor comes out and gives them problems. Come to find out, the well and the septic system was not on their property. You can go out to a property and say, I want to buy this house. Oh, it's got the water well and the septic system. You're not going to be able to determine where that line is by just riding by and looking at it. And it's so fun and exciting when you're going to buy a house or you're selling your house and making a lot of money. But go ahead on the front end, do what you need to do, because there are ways to fix problems before they actually come up. So anyway, always get your property surveyed before you start doing something and before you buy it, because there are a lot of people who sink a lot of money into certain projects, ultimately to not get anything out of it.
Yeah, and I'll say this. If you're ever looking to do anything with a piece of property that you own, you should have a survey on it. I mean, I live in a subdivision, and even my subdivision, and there are some bigger lots in my subdivision, but the way that my property is oriented toward the street, it's not at all intuitive to see how the lot is shaped. And when Ross came out and marked my property lines, it was and I mean, I knew kind of where they were, so it wasn't as shocking as probably it is in some states. But I mean, it was that's the weirdest. How come it's that way? Because on paper it looked like straight lines, but in real life it looks like a really jagged, slanted line.
The biggest misconception is when you're standing on the road.
Yeah, it's not just where the grass line is, where somebody's cutting the grass.
Goes straight off the road and it follows the grass line where somebody's cut the grass. Most of the time people cut a little bit extra because they want to make sure everything looks nice around their property. But when you stand on the road, sometimes it kind of messes with your head because the angle of the line, it may be totally sideways.
Mm-hmm.
And so having those corners or those lines staked before you buy it helps because most of the time you're going to be putting up a fence at some point in time.
Yeah.
And the most common thing will be people putting fences on the wrong property because they find an old fence post or they find their driveway and they just go straight off the road, and then the neighbors start calling. Mm-hmm. And then they have to rip the fence up and they, waste a lot of money.
So here's a question. Do fence companies like sign a waiver or anything? Do they say, hey, like, if you don't have a survey, like, sign this saying like we're not responsible for it? I'm just curious.
I don't know that for sure, but I would imagine that they try to limit the liability on themselves. Mm-hmm. But I guarantee you, if somebody calls them and says, hey, I want to put up a fence, they're going to put up the fence. They're not going to wait 6 weeks for me to come out and survey the property. Yeah. They're ready to get the job done and keep going. And, so if you're ever thinking about building a fence, call right now and get your property surveyed so that,
Do you get a lot of referrals from fence companies? That'd be a good source.
Actually, I don't. Probably 2 this year, the fence company actually called me and said, hey, I need you to flag this line because I'm not sure where the property is. I think a lot of times if it's obvious, they may feel more comfortable. But if it's, I don't know, I would definitely...
Yeah. Oh, it makes me want to start a fence company.
Yeah. and you might as well. You do everything else.
No, I got enough right now. So what are some ways? So, I'll back up and say something else that I just thought of a little while ago is also the importance of dealing with somebody who knows a lot of local regulations. I know that you're hand in glove with the parish municipalities and the city folks who kind of help make those rules. And a lot of them have changed or they're constantly changing. But in the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen a lot of change.
So that is a very good point. And that is probably what I have to do 60% of my time is educate the public on local regulations. Mm-hmm. Not only that, but I'm having to educate on changes in the local regulations. Yeah. So, between our region right here, we're dealing with several municipalities, several parishes. And so not only are you having to keep up with the changes, you're having to keep up with what can I do in certain areas. So someone may do something in, let's say, Livingston Parish, but they have property in Tangipahoa Hope Parish and they're trying to do the same thing. Well, you can't because the regulations are totally different.
Right.
So having somebody who is up to speed on changes and it happens fast.
Yeah.
So unless you're, keeping up to date and, thankfully we have a great relationship with all of the planning offices.
Yeah, they do.
Really. The municipalities, that is what I would, urge people to do is, check the regulations because in the case of you buying property or having different investments, one of the main things that I do whenever you call me is I look at the regulations and I say, can we accomplish what Will wants to do? A lot of times it's no. It's not because, financially it doesn't work. It's because, the regulations won't allow us to do it. And so if you're dealing with somebody out of this region or out of the state, they're not going to know all of the regulations. And you may spend money on a survey and it not get passed through the planning office and, you're out of luck.
Well, not only that, but I think even having your institutional history with them, because why something changed and what, and sometimes there are variances, some that makes sense, but having somebody who's got a relationship with them that does a lot of business with them, who can kind of speak to, a certain person, like I know what's important to this, official and what they need to hear to make this make sense.
Well, we know how each individual parish or municipality wants their projects done. So we do things differently in every single city and every single parish but we know, so it's faster. We're not having to go back and forth a lot of the times. And right now the big thing is with the state health department with the sewer systems and all. That used to not be a part of what we would have to worry about as surveyors, but now in order to get projects through the planning office, we have to go that extra step and work with the state health office to make sure that the sewer verifications are there. And that's another aspect. Somebody may call for a job, and now we have to say, where's your sewer system? Where does it discharge to? Right. And if they don't know, I can't guarantee that project is going to work until, we actually get out there and do the survey and figure out, where's their discharge going. And so that's another aspect. There's a lot of different things that people don't think about whenever they're starting a project. They have just one goal in their mind and they don't see the bigger picture.
Well, yeah, and that's true because I can't tell you the number of times I've called you with something not thinking about, I think ABC, and then there's like the rest of the alphabet that Ross is like, wait a minute, we got to worry about P and Q. And so you've helped me by, another surveyor or another company might not understand all of those things, but you tell me on the front end, hey, before we even approach the permit office, you need to get these ducks in a row.
My goal
is me a ton of time.
My goal is to make my clients money. Because if your project goes through, you're using me to do the project. So, my business comes from your business. So that's why I really do take the time to look at every single thing that comes across my desk. Because ultimately, I do enjoy helping people. And especially maybe young investors who don't have the experience or the knowledge. Those are the people that will get taken advantage of and also will, trip up a few times in the learning process, but it doesn't have to be that way. If you get with the right professionals and you can, have an advisor or a consultant look at these projects, you don't have to go down that path of like learning the hard way. And unfortunately, the biggest thing that I see, how many times have you heard somebody say, I want a rent trailer. I want to get a few rent trailers to start, investing.
Yeah, I want to build a trailer park.
I want to build a trailer park. Well, that's the biggest thing that I see across the board, especially from younger people. And, I don't think they realize that you can only have one mobile home per property. Okay. The days of having 2, 3 or multiple ones on a piece of property are over.
So I thought it was like 2 per acre and a half. That changed since the last time. Okay, yeah.
You can have one mobile home.
Ross proving his value as we speak.
One mobile home per property. And certain parishes are different, but particularly in Tangibo Parish, you have to have at least a half acre for that mobile home. So what'll happen, you'll have a great deal on 1 acre or 2 acres. And somebody will come to me, hey, I want to put 2 or 3 mobile homes. Well, sorry, you can't do that. Well, I already bought it. Let's divide it and let's put 2 of them. Well, the property's not big enough for you to divide. You only can put 1 mobile home here. Well, I've already had my plan. I need at least 2 mobile homes in order to pay my bank note. I'm sorry. You can't do that. Right. Well, then they end up losing the property. And so that right there alone is the best value of having somebody who knows the local regulations, because once you're in it and you're out. And so we can avoid that by sitting down and looking at projects together.
Yeah. And that's the real estate consultancy part where it comes in. And like I said, I cannot emphasize enough how valuable Ross has been to my personal investment journey and tons of my clients. So I know one of the questions I had going in, but it's already answered, is like, when should you get a survey?
Well, the easy answer is all the time. I told
every single time.
I told somebody the other day, we need to start a subscription to where we'll do an annual survey for your property. So just get it resurveyed every year, get it flagged up, get it staked.
I like that.
And then that way, you'll always know where your property markers are. And one thing I do want to plug right here is, if you do get your property surveyed, put some type of large monumentation on your property corners, not metal, by the way, because that makes our job hard, but put some type of wood fence post or put a big T-post in to where...
Why not metal?
Well,
I thought y'all use metal detectors, or...
Well, we do, but if you put metal on metal, then we can't... Our equipment can't find what we need to find.
All right.
So, if you put it right next to the corner, but most of the time people... move things around.
Yeah.
And so the more metal, the harder it is for me.
Interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah. So every property corner has a permanent, whether it's a rebar or pipe in the ground, and we use our equipment to locate that. And if there's more metal around, it just makes it harder. But that's one thing is, put things on your property corner so that in 5 years, you're not calling me again to say, hey, I need my corners flagged up again. Feel free to do that. I will definitely take the business.
Right? Yeah.
But it will just make your life easier if you can go back and reestablish your own property.
Yeah. Well, and one thing I want to talk about, we referenced it a little bit earlier, is subdividing property and kind of adding value to a situation by subdividing property and selling it off in pieces. And Ross helped me with a project that we did. It's on Gliderport Road in Tangipahoa Parish. Oh, and I wanted to say one other thing about our area, because we live and work in a fairly rural area. Like, we have parishes here instead of counties. For all you out-of-state listeners, Louisiana is the only person who breaks it down by parishes. Our parishes are fairly rural, and we have some subdivisions. We have lots of subdivisions, but the vast majority of our property is outside of subdivisions in rural land that's sometimes vacant, sometimes doesn't have a lot of, it's not fresh cut lawns necessarily. There's property lines like in the woods, like Ross has to do a lot of traveling in the woods. So that's a really important factor in our area specifically. So that's why I'm having him on the show. One of the projects that we worked on together was on Gliderport Road. I had the opportunity to buy a house that needed a good bit of work. I was originally going to flip the house, and it was on 32 acres, and it was a very good deal, succession property. The people weren't really that interested. The agent was about to list it. I found out about it, and he knew what they wanted. He said, hey, this is what they want. And I was like, I think that I could make some good money off of that. And so went to Ross and said, hey, what do you think about this? And he laid it out. At the time, we couldn't do now what we did then, because the regulations have changed since then. Like I said, they're changing a lot. But we subdivided the property into 6 different parcels, one of which had a house on it that I was able to sell to some very good friends and clients of mine, Jamie and Amber Roy. Shout out to y'all. They're doing a beautiful job fixing it up. Many of you know them. They got a great deal on an awesome house. And I went on to sell several of the lots, one to to Amber's mom and several other clients right there. And everybody was really happy. Ross is managing the owner finance bond for deeds for some of those.
Yeah, that's a great example of how we were talking about earlier, maximizing your investment, because you could have easily sold that house with the 32 acres and, had X amount of dollars in it per acre. Well, you totally changed the value by cutting out these lots. And, you're still getting the value with the house, which I believe we kept on a pretty large tract, I think like 10 acres or so.
Yeah, it was like 8 acres in the house.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so you were able to get the value of the house, but then also you found value that was not there before by creating a few lots on the highway. And so that is a great example of really taking the time to think about how can we best maximize this investment, because you could have took the easy route. You could have flipped it yourself, done well on it. Well, somebody else could have come behind you, bought the house, then split the lots up, and they would have made the money. So, you were able to really capitalize on that. And a lot of times people don't realize that's an option. Mm-hmm. And then another aspect, what you said just now, we can't do what we did then now.
Yeah.
And that was only 2 years ago.
Yeah, 2 or 3 years ago.
2 or 3 years ago. So that's how quick the parish regulations change. And so if you're not on top of it, you may buy this house thinking, I could do all of this with it. Well, guess what? You can't do that anymore. So
there were several ways that you helped me, not in that transaction necessarily, but when you saw stuff coming down the pipe and you were like, hey, if you're going to do this, you got to do it now. Or what's even more beneficial is just because that door has closed, it opens up other doors. Yeah. There's new things I can do now that I couldn't maybe do then.
Correct. And I do have to say, with the regulations changing, it always is to benefit the future of a certain area. So, there's nothing wrong with the regulations changing. You just have to conform your investment style in order to fit the mold that the city or the parish has. And so a lot of times because of, utilities or infrastructure, and by them changing the regulations, it helps either catch up with the infrastructure, and ultimately it makes the quality of life better for everyone. However, you just have to sometimes pivot your investment strategy a little bit, and it still works.
Yeah, and that is one thing that I've learned. It's like it's easy to say, oh, the mean old parish or the mean old city changing it. No, it's for the benefit of the citizenry at large, and so it's going to make everything better. You just can't be caught like in the middle, like where you thought you could do something but you can't do it, and that's the importance of having good advisors.
Yeah, and I'll say this too. There's I thought of another example where we had a lady out of state call us because she had 4 acres and she wanted us to get just a standard survey. Well, come to find out, we go to survey it, and she actually didn't have 4 acres. She had 4 acres less than except the road right of way and everything east of the road. Once we surveyed it, she had, I think it was like 3.5 acres or so. So she lost a whole half acre. Well, I think she already had a buyer for it, so the transaction fell through. So she's had the property for years and years and just never realized that she didn't own anything up to the road or over the road. And she got it appraised for 4 acres. She had everything in line. Well, guess what? The appraiser is not going to take the time. If they don't have an updated survey on it, they're not going to do the title work. They're giving their opinion based off of what you provide them.
Yeah.
And so we get calls all the time from appraisers and attorneys that are needing clarity on what is going on out here. And I know we talked about surprises earlier, and the biggest surprise that I see is when we're surveying a rural piece of property, which, like you said earlier, we're in a rural area, you may have 4 or 5 acres more than what you thought. So in the description where you have more or less 70 acres, you may have 75 acres. You may have 65 acres. Well, if your appraisal is based off of your deed that says 70 acres, that may throw off your financing. And so it's really important to have that survey done. And, it's kind of like survey at your own risk, because it may benefit you as the buyer, because if you're paying $10,000 per acre and there's 50 acres, but the survey comes back at 45 acres, well, that's, 5 acres you're not paying for.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's a matter of, you don't want to pay for the acreage that's not there. At the same time, if it comes back as more acreage,
5 acres that you're paying for but not getting.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you may be paying $10,000 per acre. Well,
all of a sudden it goes up to 11,000 acre or whatever. Yeah.
So if you are paying for a certain amount of acreage, you want to know exactly what that acreage is before you pay. Because I had a guy recently who bought 53, more or less 53 acres. Well, we did the survey after the fact because he was getting ready to build on it, and it came back at right at 50 acres. Well, he had paid $10,000 per acre, so that was like $30,000 that he paid for. Well, he's like, man, he sold me 53 acres. Where's the other 3 acres? It never was there.
It was never there.
It was more or less.
Well, that's interesting because I've been in situations where people didn't know exactly what it was, and they came up after and they were like, well, wait a minute, that changes things. But, in reality, if just going back to that lady with the 3.5 acres, if the buyer saw what they were buying, they knew they didn't own the road, but they thought in their head, they thought it was 4 acres. They're buying the same thing, but it's actually 3.5. So I've been able to help buyers through that process, because it doesn't feel good to get 3.5 if you thought you were getting 4, but you're still getting the same thing you thought you were getting. That's going to matter to some people. It's not going to matter to other people. So it can have a very bad effect on a deal, which is why clarity is so important. But at the end of the day, the guy knew what he was buying, and he bought what he thought was 53, but it was actually 50. The price is what matters. I've actually dealt with deals where we did a survey and we put it under contract for X amount per acre. So we actually, the sales price at the end of the day, we knew, the seller knew, the buyer knew, we knew it was going to be about, I don't remember what that one was. I can't remember if you did that one. It was a long time ago. But we knew it was going to be so many acres or so.
Yeah, contingent on the survey.
It was, Was it Harper? Not Harper. Yeah, I think it was Harper. Harper
Look,
Lane off of 43. Yeah, anyway,
I've
sorry.
done so many.
But it ended up where it was a few acres more than the guy knew, and so we paid a little bit more because we got more acreage, and we were fine with that, and he was too. So a lot of times you can do it that way if you're going under contract, but you don't want to. Like, you want to set the expectations based on the survey before closing.
And I know this is, more of an investment type podcast. So, I am a tool to help your negotiations.
Absolute.
If you have a survey, you don't have to give that to the seller. You as a buyer get a survey during your due diligence. Use that as clarity and power and say, hey, I know that I have exactly 50 acres here. This is how much I'm willing to pay. This is what I can do with the property. Then you go back and negotiate. And with that same token, elevations here in our area are a big part. Knowing the elevation of a property.
I was going to ask you about flood zones. That's a big part of it. Yeah.
Flood zones,
and flood elevations.
That is a great negotiating tool because, if you come to me and we do an elevation certificate on a property, you can go back to the seller and say, hey, half of this property is in a flood zone and this is what the flood level is. You're going to have to come off the price if if we're going to make this deal work. And then, at the same time, I've had clients where we've done a flood determination and part of the property was in a floodway, which means no touchy. Yeah. You cannot build on it. And so
that's a technical term, no touchy.
No touchy. Yeah. So, until I really got into flood elevations, I didn't know what a floodway was. And most people, they don't understand what a floodway is.
Yeah, that's different. There's flood zones and then there's floodways. Floodway basically means like it's going to be a river at some point.
Yeah, so you are not allowed to to clear it, to build on anything like that. So if you find out that part of your property is in a floodway, you're going back to the seller and saying, hey,
it's a useless piece of property.
This is useless. Yeah. Either come off the price or I'm gonna have to walk away. And so, like I said, use us as a tool for your negotiations, because if you have clarity on what a property is and what you could do with the property, then you can feel more comfortable really going to the drawing board and saying, hey, this is what my offer is. This is what I'm willing to do.
So I want to hear a couple of stories. I mean, you've already shared a couple of examples, but maybe a story of like a time that you saved a deal that was going south because of your services, or maybe a time that you tanked the deal that didn't need to be saved, that you saved the bacon of a buyer or seller.
So let me think of one that would be good to explain. So this is one where we kind of saved the deal. This was a very strange piece of property, and the buyer had some really pretty cool plans with the property. However, it was 10 acres. It bordered on the south by a drainage canal. And in Tangipahoa Parish, they have a 100-foot drainage servitude from the top of drainage canals. There was also a drainage canal coming down the middle of it. And then off-site on the northern part, there was another drainage canal. By the time we did the survey and we had all of the drainage servitudes
in,
there was about this much land for him to build on. And so his whole plan was out the window.
So 10 acres became how much buildable space?
I think he may have had like 3.5 acres, but it was like long straight. I mean, it was really not
ideal,
practical.
Yeah.
So going back to knowing the parish regulations, we were able to go to the drainage board and get a servitude reduction for this client.
Interesting.
And we were able to reduce it from 100 foot to 50 feet, which then opened up the door for him to be able to have more buildable land. But also in this case, there was part of it that was in a floodway as well. So didn't necessarily save the deal. The deal was done, but we were able to kind of.
So he had already done the deal when he got the survey, so he should have. Yeah.
Yes. So example A of why you do it before,
right.
But example B of why you go with someone who knows the regulations,
right,
because we were able to.
Might be able to salvage it.
We were able to reconfigure and help him, still utilize the property.
Well, and I'll bring up another example, because you've done that for us many times, where we bought a property under certain guidelines and expectations, and then they changed. And we weren't expecting that, or we held on to the property longer than we should. And now, well, we can't do that. But Ross, what can we do, Ross? Tell us what we can do. And yeah, it works out.
Exactly. And so, I explained earlier about how the water well and the septic system was off the property. That's a case where, too little, too late, you already bought the house, but, we can catch things like that before you buy the property, and then you can run away, instead of getting stuck with that. So really to sum up of when we've saved deals, like I said earlier, we have several title attorneys that call me all the time to say, hey, I have this going on. The lender will not lend us this money because we don't have a survey on it. I can't offer title insurance. If I don't get this survey, this deal will fall through. And there are a lot of times where, once the survey is done, everything is smooth sailing. So I don't particularly have like an example of that, but I would say at least once or twice a month, we save deals by helping it get to the closing table for either the lender or the title company.
Yeah, that's awesome. And look, Ross has been a very valuable tool and a resource and a business partner, really. Like, that's how I consider Ross in lots of different of my businesses. So one final question: what is like the craziest survey story you have? Like, whether you encountered something while you were surveying the property, or an irate, homeowner, or somebody who thought they owned it, or
so,
or anything. You can have a number of stories too. I'm sure you have a couple.
So we see stuff all the time, and I really do feel bad for the guys sometimes because, first of all, people have a misconception. Everybody thinks we are surveying the road. They think we're putting a new road in. They think we're doing something with utilities. So anybody who sees us out there coming out and saying, "What are you doing?" Second thing is they say, "Get off my property." Get off my property. Well, we have to take some time and explain what we're doing, and then they calm down. But I've had guns get pulled out on me.
Oh,
I've
really?
had knives. Recently, I was doing a survey by Amite High School, and it's a very broad school, and one of the neighbors was very confused on I guess where his property was, and he was convinced that I was on his property when I was standing right next to the football field, and so I wasn't even able to get to where I needed to go because, let's just say, I didn't feel safe.
Okay.
So it didn't get to do that, but one story keeps coming up in my head on like a crazy thing is we were doing a survey in French Settlement and literally had to just walk through hundreds and hundreds of feet of swamp to get to where we were going. And there's, my guys don't like me to say this, but there's nowhere we won't go. So there are lots of jobs that people will run from, but I will give you a price and we will do whatever the job is. Mm-hmm. But this particular job, it was very rough. It was long and skinny piece, and I remember it was really cold. So we had our waders on, and I believe it was one of my guys. It was like one of the first few weeks he worked. Well, with the swamp, you have cypress knees. You can't see them; they're under the water. So as we're working, down goes my new surveyor and down goes our GPS unit, and they disappear under the water. And so that was probably the most shocking thing at that time. But yeah, so we go into the swamp.
Any alligators or snakes or?
Oh, we see snakes all the time. So the rule is we don't talk about it, because when you start talking about it, you start seeing them.
Oh, okay.
So we try not to say the S word a lot.
So I won't. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So sorry, guys. They're gonna probably see snakes today. But yeah. So we have a lot of crazy people that we have to encounter, because a lot of times we do have to go off site. We do have to kind of go down the road a little bit to be able to establish the boundaries of our client's property. But ultimately, you just have to be nice. You have to explain what you're doing. And most of the time we don't get shot.
Mm-hmm. Well, nobody's ever been shot that I've heard of anyway, right? Yeah.
No, we could always get out of it usually.
Okay, so Ross is a nice guy. He's a very reasonable, calming presence. So.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Ross, so much for sharing all of those good ideas. And listen, hopefully you've taken some things out of our podcast today. Ross has been a great, valuable client. They're sponsoring the podcast today, so we really appreciate that. And thank you for all you've been a blessing in my life in many, many different ways. And so I appreciate you.
Well, it's always fun to get together to hear your crazy business ideas. I appreciate you having me on today. I hope that we were able to shed some light on the surveying side and bring some clarity to real estate investment. So, I'm happy that I was able to come on today.
Clarity is power, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Well, thank you for listening to the Will Frederick Podcast, where we talk about real estate, wealth building, money, and life. See you next time.